texts, in the prophets, and in the histories of Israel, everything is always referring to, there are so many references to the Exodus. And when God delivered Israel from the Pharaoh and out of the Red Sea. So it raises the question, okay, so if the Israelites, if Israel herself knew and understood herself, or understood her God, based on the event of the Exodus, why doesn't the Bible start with the Exodus? Why does the Bible start with Genesis? And I would suggest that the reason is because there's this theological understanding that the history of Israel is rooted in the creation. It has roots in the creation. So it has a spiritual depth, so there's a spiritual root to it. So in other words, the history of Israel itself is cosmic. It's of cosmic significance. It's not just the history of the people. There's something cosmic about this history of Israel. And so the biblical editors, as they're putting the Bible together over the centuries, they start with the creation in order to show the cosmic, primordial roots of Israel's history. And it's interesting furthermore that as you trace the pages of the scriptures of the Old Testament, and you go through all the genealogies, you can find the genealogy of Christ.
Right? Can't have an Exodus without people.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, there had to be people to have an Exodus.
Right.
So Genesis has to come first.
Why? Because it needs to show where the people come from?
Right.
Yeah. So it's showing that the people originate or come from, the root of the world. So that there's this cosmic spiritual significance to the people of Israel. They understood that, and so they said it in light of the creation event. All right, so let's block out the history of the Old Testament and contemplate how it looks, or how it is the template of the Christian life, and how that and what that says to each of us about how we negotiate the Christian life. So let's start with, we can start either with the Exodus or with the creation, but let's start with the creation because that's where the Bible starts. So let's look at the creation event. Specifically, let's look at the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and let's just block it out in the most, the most basic, outlines. So what do we have? What's the first thing? Obviously, the creation of the world. And then what's next? I say creation of the world, that would be heaven and earth. And then let's say the creation of Adam. What happens after Adam? Yes, Tim?
I was just going to say, actually God speaks, that's the first thing.
Okay, should we put that in there?
The fact that he speaks, I think that's...
Yes, it is important. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll put it in parentheses as the elaboration of creation. God speaks the word. He speaks the word. So that's the first thing that happens. God speaks. All right. And he creates the world. He creates heaven and earth. And he creates Adam. Now, something happens. Something significant happens between the creation of Adam and then the creation of Eve, from Adam's rib. There's several things that happen. God gives to Adam the command to name all the animals. And then he gives him another. So he gives him a series of commands. He gives him a series of commands before he creates Eve. And the naming of the animals is one of them. But there's another command that I want to put in here, and that command would be what? The first command, in fact, that he gives to Adam after he's created him. The very first command after he's created him from the earth in chapter 2. Don't eat from the tree. Don't eat from the tree. So he gives a commandment. It may be confusing you because obviously there's two accounts of the creation, right? There's the account of the creation in chapter 1. There's the account of the creation in chapter 2. I'm speaking of the account in chapter 1. But can I say just a word here about these two creation accounts? Biblical scholars, they will tell us, and no doubt they're correct. I believe them. That what we have are two different creation accounts. Chapter 1 is one creation account. Chapter 2 is a different creation account. You have to understand that the scriptures are put together from who knows, scores, hundreds of texts from all different sources. And when the editors who put the Bible together, when they sit down to put the Bible together, they have all of these texts that they're needing to merge, to put together. So obviously what this particular editor did was he took this creation account, he put it there, and then he took this creation account and he put it there. So we have two different accounts. And then you can study the two different accounts, and if you're a biblical scholar, you might look at the different accounts and see how they differ in their theological message. But now, what's really interesting to me is, and I'll note it in the sermon this morning, the first creation account ends, you might say, at chapter 2, verse 3. Now, is that the Orthodox Study Bible, Marvin?
Mm-hmm.
Read chapter 2, verse 3, if you would.
Okay. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. And because of it, he rested from all his works that God began to make.
All right. He rested from all his works that he had begun to do. In the Hebrew text of the RSV or the King James, it does not have that he began to do. But in the Greek Septuagint, it does. It says that he began to do.
It says began to make or do.
He began to do, yes, please. He began to make or to do or to create. Now, notice that he rested. He rested. And so he rests. But then go on to chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. What does he do? Is he resting? What's he doing? Somebody read it. Go ahead, Fred.
Sure. This is the book of the Genesis of heaven and earth, when they were made, in the day of the Lord God made heaven and earth, before any plant on the field was on earth, and before any herb of the field sprang up. For God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a fountain came up from the ground and watered the whole face of the earth. Then God formed man out of the dust from the ground and breathed in his face, and the breath of life, and the man became a living soul.
All right. Now, and what is the setting of God